It is a material with which a lot of money is made, too valuable just for coins. It is durable, it does not rust, and it conducts well. The red gold has been indispensable to mankind for millennia. Copper. The largest copper mine in the world is situated in the north of Chile in the Atacama Desert, a hostile place where rain only falls every few years. In Chuquicamata, people have been turning ore into copper for more than 100 years. Nowhere else are there as many reserves as there are here. A quarter of worldwide demand comes from the mine of Chuquicamata. Every morning, Vladimiro Zabidra has to go high up to get to his place of work. His lorry is roughly the size of a family home and can carry up to 360 tons of ore. Vladimiro has been working at the state-owned mine association Codelco for 17 years. His father too mined ore here. I have always liked driving the biggest lorry in the world. It is as if a childhood dream has come true. I always wanted to work for this factory. My lorry is really very big. It is 840 tons that we drive with here. The smaller vehicles have to have a flag on their roof so that they are not run down by the giant lorries by accident. For safety reasons, traffic is on the left in the mine. Experience showed that drivers have a better overview that way. This morning, Vladimiro transports worthless rock. It contains too little copper and is therefore taken to a slag heap. The drivers have to maneuver their lorries close to the abyss in order to dispose of the overburden. There is always a fear of slipping off. Of course, one has to be very, very careful. Pay attention. These lorries are very, very dangerous because of their weight and volume, if nothing else. In winter, the lorries are iced over and so are the paths in the pit, and there is a risk that these large lorries start to slip because of their weight alone. You have to learn to control them in order to get home in one piece. The foundry is the final stop in the processing of copper. Here, the prepared ore is smelted several times. Every smelting process increases the concentration of the metal. At the end, what remains is almost pure copper, 99.98%. Juan Chinchilla is there for the casting. Juan is responsible for 2 furnaces and 20 workers. They regularly take samples to check the copper content. Here it is 70% right now. The foundry is a labyrinth of halls and staircases. During the smelting procedure, the furnaces suck in oxygen, a whistling sound. The noise they make is deafening and they are red hot. Juan Chinchilla is glad when he has some work to do in his quiet air-conditioned control room every so often. All furnaces are monitored by computer and cameras. The workers receive their instructions by radio. Although safety regulations are very strict, Juan has experienced some bad accidents. It was during the night shift, just when a colleague was about to repair part of a current transformer. Something went wrong. The machine caught fire. It happened near the control box. The worker was not able to get out. He had no chance and he simply burned to death. We saw it through the screen. We saw how he desperately tried to get out, threw himself on the floor, but he didn't manage to get out. We saw it and couldn't do anything because there was no access to that area. The game with fire is difficult to control. In the last years, the state-owned mining corporation Codelco has done a lot to change their workers' awareness. The macho minero, who believes that only weaklings wear gas masks and safety shoes, no longer exists. Protective clothing is compulsory today. If you are caught without it more than 3 times, you are cautioned. If you do not keep to the regulations after that, you get fired. In Chuquicamata, the ore has a relatively high copper content at 1.5%. It thus contains almost twice as much as the mines of the competition in other countries. That makes mining enormously lucrative here, despite the difficult conditions. The ore is mined in the world's largest artificial hole. It is 4 kilometers long, 2 kilometers wide, and 1 kilometer deep. Every day, somewhere there is a blast in the mine. That way, the copper-rich rock is loosened and can be loaded. Transportation with a lorry from the mine takes 40 minutes. Around 100 lorries work during each shift. Vladimiro's final trip before he finishes work. The drivers have a lot of power and a strong trade union. It has managed to achieve that at 2,000 euros per month, they earn the best money in the mine. This often causes the other colleagues to be envious. Vladimiro delivers his final load to the so-called concentration, where the ore is first of all mechanically processed. Concentration, as the name suggests. Here, concentrated copper is produced, but the journey there is long, across endless conveyor belts and through numerous mills. At first, the ore is roughly crushed, sorted, and washed. Every day, this plant processes 180,000 tons of rock, which eventually yield 2,500 tons of pure copper. Only few people still work here. Everything is monitored by computer. Only the grinding gears of the mills, which are made from simple iron balls and iron bars, have to be exchanged and maintained from time to time. Here, the ore is ground relatively finely into a grey mud. Every 2 or 3 weeks, the mills are completely taken apart and newly fitted. This procedure takes an entire day. This is where the brain of the concentration is. Everything is interlinked. and the men in the control room can check at any time whether there's enough rock on the conveyor belts or whether there's a shortage of water somewhere. They are told this in the voice of Tanya, a former trainee, which is played back by computer. Previously it was a man's voice, but no one had listened to it. It is a woman's voice, and that makes our soul happy. A woman at our place of work, where there are only men, that relaxes us. Tanya is the soul of everything. That is the truth. And you can't live without a soul. It is like a garden without flowers, like an abandoned garden. Do you understand? The chemical processing is done in the same building. In these large tanks, tensides are added to the boulders. Then the mixture is stirred well until it is nice and foamy. That way, the copper rises and the boulders separate. The copper content is now already at up to 35%, concentrated enough for the smeltery. Chuquicamata. That is the mine, but also a town specifically for the workers. Until recently, almost everyone lived right next to the mine. For more than 100 years, this has been a town exclusively for mineros. When Vladimiro leaves work for home, he does not have far to go. But this proximity also has disadvantages. The waste gases from the smeltery and the dust pollute the air. A few years ago, Chile signed contracts to comply with international environmental norms. Since then, it has become clear that the inhabitants of Chuquicamata will have to be relocated by 2007. Of the original 12,000 people, only 8,000 still live here. And Vladimiro's family, too, is already sitting on packed suitcases. Vladimiro and his wife Susanna have taken their grandchildren to live with them. Their own children have left town to go to university. Vladimiro and Susanna are very reluctant to move. They have spent their entire lives in Chuqui, the pet name for their town. Susanna is preparing her grandchildren for the move. And you will go to school directly on the bus? Yes. Well, that will be a nice responsibility for you. You know, you have to get on and off exactly in the right place. If the bus doesn't let you out in the right place in Calama, then look for Chuqui. They will miss the calm, their friends, the familiar, says Vladi. Codelco contaminates us while we sleep. When you sleep, you don't really notice the pollution. During the day, there is more wind, and so the smoke disperses. When I drive my lorry at night and look for our houses, the mountains, which are very close by, I don't see them. That's how much dust there is. The danger comes with age. The majority of the workers who retire move to the harbor, to the south, but they don't have much life left. A pensioner from Codelco usually dies after 3 to 4 years. Because when they go with silicosis. They leave contaminated. The end of an era for Vladimiro's family, for the town of Chuquicamata. The state-owned mining group Codelco is promoting health and safety for their workers, but they care like that not purely out of brotherly love. There are tangible financial reasons. The group needs new areas. Once the workers have gone, their houses will get buried under boulders and overburden. The hunger for copper is insatiable. Dust is man's biggest enemy here. In order to fight it, one needs water, but water is scarce in one of the driest deserts on Earth. This torrential stream is coming from the chemical processing of the copper mud. Highly poisonous, filthy water that gets diverted into the desert for reprocessing. It's an economy measure. The more Codelco reprocesses its wastewater, the less money they need to spend on fresh water from the mountains. David Montesinos is responsible for there always being plenty of water in the mine. Otherwise, production comes to a standstill. It is part of his daily routine to monitor the pumping and distribution stations. A new cover is being built for the canal because the pressure is sometimes so high that the corrosive flood frothers over. The water is very contaminated when it leaves the mine. For example, with arsenic, acids, and lots of chemicals. It can't be used for anything. You can't drink it, and the acids can damage your skin. It is essential for us not to be wasteful with the water, to know how to be economical with it. The better we do that, the better it is not just for us, but also for our children. Every day, David covers 60 to 70 kilometers on his control drives. He makes sure that the leads are tight and he talks to the workers. David loves his job in the desert. Everybody thinks here life stops, here green nature stops. But the desert has its own magic too. It gives you something that inspires you. Being alone here is a very spiritual experience for me. Reprocessing is simple. The water pours across the decline into the desert, sits in the basin for a few days so that the harmful chemical can sink to the bottom. Then it is pumped back into the mine. You cannot drink it, but it is sufficient for the mine. It used to be different. Worse, much worse. In the 1930s, the Americans ran the Chilean mines. They did not care about the environment. This road leads from a mine further north down to the coast, across 100 kilometers. The wastewater went the same way. More than 50 years, the dirty copper-rich water poured through the canals, untreated, corrosive, reeking. It was the cheapest solution. It was not necessary to reprocess the water because there was more fresh water coming down from the Andes to this plant. The water finished up in the sea, and although the discharge was stopped at the beginning of the 90s, the coast is still contaminated. The sea had stored the harmful chemicals, and now it gradually sets them free again. There is hardly any life left over a stretch of 7 kilometers. Chilean biologists have been investigating the effects of the catastrophe for a few years. A checkpoint 20 kilometers north of the contaminated area. Here, there is still plenty of algae. The biologists from Universidad Católica in Santiago de Chile take out spores and algae in order to plant them in the contaminated places. Professor Juan Moreno believes that it will be decades before the coast recovers. With this type, or organism, the copper directly affects the cells. The cells are destroyed when the amount of copper exceeds a certain level. The plants are unable to regenerate, so that in the end they die. The algae are replanted in the contaminated areas of the coast. They are fixed to the rocks using drills. Some algae have already survived an entire year. Scientists are investigating whether they also reproduce. This is the second experiment. The first one took place 1 year ago. Compared to those at the control places, where they grow naturally, you can see that they don't look good after 2 months. They don't grow. They pull in their arms. They don't stick to the rock. A few kilometers further on, the little port of Chañaral. Until the early 80s, the wastewater from the mine ran right across the beach into the sea. There are still traces of it today. The beach outside the little town is green from the oxidized copper. A gigantic reservoir for copper mud and other highly poisonous substances such as arsenic. It would cost the state-owned mining company millions to clean it up. Instead, they built a playground and a beach promenade to calm down the angry residents. The strong coastal wind blows the fine dust from the effluent sludge into the town. The environmental officer and the chief press officer of Codelco. They are trying to qualify the danger.
No son tóxicos.
The copper remains are not poisonous to the people. The real danger is the dust that spreads through the air. The tiny particles that it contains hugely impair the quality of the air. It is true that the fine dust damages people's lungs. Only after Pinochet was overthrown at the end of the 80s did the residents dare protest against this environmental catastrophe. Last summer, the Chilean president swam here to show that the water is not poisonous. We essentially have two options. On the one hand, we can try and cover up the sand so that the dust doesn't swirl up. The other option is wide-ranging, artificial plantings that could provide protection. The mining company has created another job. This man combats the dust with a water hose. It is ultimately always about who will pay. No, I don't believe that Codelco does enough to remedy the damages, given the extent of the damages. Codelco certainly doesn't do enough. In a few years, only the graveyard will be evidence that people once lived in Chuquicamata. Vladimiro, like many miners, is very Christian. He often takes his son to visit Virgin Mary statues and graveyards. Chuquicamata will disappear, but it is a good thing that the graveyard will stay. A lot is linked to it: emotions, family, friends. It is important that nobody should be forced to unbury his friend and bury him again somewhere else. That would happen if the mine came here too. That would be terrible. Vladimiro's son has already left the town towards the sea to study. He cannot imagine going back to Chuquicamata, nor can he imagine the hard work in the mine. Because my father's work is very exhausting, especially the night shifts. It is difficult to recover from it. No, I don't want to drive his lorry. I want to study in order to be able to do a job that I enjoy. In the early evening, the lorries leave the mine. Now is the time for the daily blastings. For security reasons, everybody has to leave the valley. When in 2015 the open cast reserves are exhausted, they will continue mining underground. The mine never sleeps. 24 hours a day, the lorries carry the ore away from the pit. Day and night, the rock is milled and copper is smelted. "400 kilometers south of the Atacama Desert, there is another Codelco mine. Here, the copper is mined underground. When the men drive in, they stay in the mountain for 8 hours. They call the transport vehicle cage because they sit so close together. They go down 3 kilometers and are not returned until the evening. The El Inca mountain is at the edge of the little town El Salvador. Those who are late have to take the goods train. Mine worker Jaime is hurrying. Everybody calls Jaime Chuck Norris because he used to enter every fist fight. A true old-style minero. There are plenty of trains that he can take. 3 crews drive the ore from the mountain all day long. Hello, Chuck Norris. How are you? Take that. Late as always again. I am just in time, my friend. El Salvador is in the mountains at an altitude of almost 2,500 meters. Copper has been mined here for only 50 years. The American corporate group had to move the mine to this place because the reserves were exhausted elsewhere. That is where the name El Salvador comes from, salvation for 3,000 mine workers and their families. Underground. Darkness, dust, confinement are the natural enemies of engine driver Hector.
Es duro la pega.
Working in the mine is hard and difficult.
Muy esclavizado.
You are enslaved.
Mucha tierra.
We have to work a lot of earth,
Se paga
many
mal
stones,
pagado.
and we are badly paid.
Pero de todas maneras,
Whether I like the work or not is not an issue. You have to do it for your family.
igual no.
You get used to it.
Aunque uno con el tiempo se va acostumbrando,
You get
aunque se
silicosis
está
or you
jodiendo
don't,
la salud más
but
que
I
todo, hasta
still
se
show
licúa,
up
porque
every
se
day.
licúa eso acá. Pero hay que estar aquí igual, todos los días. Muchas gracias. Gracias, que esté bien, pues.
While Chuck is on his way to work, Hector drives on to load up fresh ore. It is particularly dusty near the chute. The rock masses drop from the top floors down into the depth. The entire mountain is divided up into individual floors like a multi-story car park. The trains pick up their cargo at the lowest level and drive it to the stone mills and the so-called concentration. Chuck has done everything in the mine before. At the moment he works on stabilizing the tunnels. He collects a welding device for this task from the material distribution place. In over 30 years, Chuck has worked in many different mines in Chile. Basically, we earn a little money here for shortening our lives. With all this dust here in the environment, you ruin your health in the long run.
Del ambiente que estamos desarrollando acá como trabajadores.
The mountain is full of holes like Swiss cheese. 5 levels with more than 1,000 kilometers of roads and 100 kilometers of rails. Sometimes even Chuck is surprised that the whole thing stands up. Chuck is welding the sheet pile walls for a new railway tunnel. If this is not done properly, the result can be deadly.
Solamente que
Tuve una vez acá un...
In one of the shafts,
cuando se está
the
quemando
blasting was
el-
calculated wrong,
el silo
and
que le
so
llaman,
there was a
donde-
fire.
donde queda
The
el
ceiling
mesón del metal.
collapsed.
Fue mal calculado el explosivo y...
One has to be very careful when stabilizing the levels and the vaults, so that the ceilings definitely won't fall down.
Que después hay que cuidar esto con las quemadas del silo de arriba.
This digger is called scoop. It transports rock to the chutes. Nobody must be where the scoop works. The digger races through the narrow tunnels in darkness and at high speed. The load of the scoop is intended for the lower levels of the mine. The little water fountain that is there to combat the all-pervading dust in the mine is almost touching. One floor down, the work goes on. The hammer begins to crush the lumps that are just a little too big. Once the hammer has finished its job, the stones move to the lowest level, where they are loaded onto trains and transported out of the mountain. As long as the freshly crushed lumps are not completely dusted over, the copper shines. The miners also spend their lunch break underground. The way to the top is far too long. There would be no time for a break. They bring their food from home and warm it up in the water quench. The canteen is just about big enough for a dozen workers. But Chuck Norris and his mates love spending time together. The jokes and teases make them forget their hard work in the mountain, at least for a little while.
Todos son mis compañeros de trabajo.
Really, they are all my friends, but especially those who are useful right now. They are my best friends.
No me quieren, yo los quiero igual.
Some may not like me, but I don't care about that.
Me andan amarrando, sí, de repente igual. Lo hago igual. Casi total, no, acá era mayoría.
Everybody here has nicknames.
Acá tenemos acá los pintos.
Here we have Ink. He is also a journalist.
El Florentino.
El Florentino. He regularly changes his name. That helps him so that he doesn't have that many children.
Acá está el cajoncito. Cajoncito de tele, dicen él. Muy buen niño. Ahí está
Him over there,
el arayita.
he is called Little Box. He's a good guy. He has a lot of money in his little box. There are blastings underground too. Wherever the troop works, the area is prohibited. There are 4 people on each vehicle. 2 close off the area and the others prepare the explosive charges. Underground explosions are dangerous and have to be calculated precisely, or the stability of the mountain of holes is at risk. Carefully, the men prepare the charges. The miners are most scared of electrical sparks that are able to trigger explosions prematurely. The drill prepares the holes for the blastings. It is always several per rock. The blasting material is shock resistant and it is ignited electrically. We of course have to see if it can get dangerous. For example, if the stones are porous on top, they can fall off at any time. We check that beforehand so that nothing happens. Fire, fire, the men from the blasting troop shout. Nobody must be left in the passageways. All work stops. Every day, a dozen of such blastings take place in the mountainous labyrinth. The tunnels are driven deeper and deeper, and the passageways are connected with each other. End of shift. Waiting for the train. Time to tell the story of the day. And time to sing songs about love, suffering, and desire in the wild life of the miners. Although they are not black like coal miners, they are happy to wash off the fine layer of mine dust. Back in Chuquicamata. This morning, Vladimiro is off work to finish the work on his new house. He and his family are moving to the town of Calama, 20 kilometers away. This will be their new home. Calama is booming and has grown to 150,000 inhabitants in the last few years. That is a lot for a desert town. The mining company Codelco is building a new district in the desert for its workers. Houses like out of a construction set. This is the street in which Vladimiro and his family will live in the future. The house is not like the one they had in Chuquicamata. Fitted carpets, smooth walls, everything new and modern. The rooms are smaller, but there are more of them. The mining company financed the building work. The workers are getting a low-interest credit. In total, the 3-bedroom house only costs $25,000. Vladimiro is able to pay off the debts slowly out of his wages. Well, I am sorry to leave Chuqui. It has been so many years. My grandchildren were born there. Well, I have spent a lot of my life there. Well, I am happy. Because unlike in the house in Chuqui, I do all these things in my own house. Nobody can send me into the street. Nobody can say that used to be your house and can say to me that it is rented out tomorrow. Or say, You have to go elsewhere. Your contract has run out, you have to go. I have now got a house that belongs to me. The initial skepticism has died down. Vladimiro's family has got to like their new home, even though Susanna is sure that she will not be able to sleep properly here during the first few weeks. Copper, the red gold. In the end, it leaves the mines of the Atacama Desert pressed to a sheet. Several thousand tons tied up into handy packages. They polish the almost pure copper one last time so that the expensive precious metal on its way to China or Europe does not oxidize and turn green. It is only 100 kilometers to the sea, but the train takes 6 hours. The steep mountain drives forced engineers in the 1920s to accomplish great feats. Bend after bend, it winds its way towards the Pacific. Dortmund. Here, at the heart of the Ruhr district, there once were blast furnaces, foundry and rolling mill. More than 20,000 people once worked on the grounds of the Westfalen ironworks at Borsigplatz. But the ironworks were unprofitable and were closed down together with the steelworks and put up for sale. The Chinese steel group Shagang took an interest in this bargain. After all, second-hand plants are cheaper than new ones. The only problem: how does one transport 250,000 tons of material from Dortmund to China? Workshop supervisor Gernot Bahr had worked in the Westfalen ironworks for 30 years. He was there when the workers from the Celestial Empire made themselves at home and packed up his furnace.
At
the beginning, it wasn't really quite clear to us how the Chinese were going to work. All we saw was that dozens of them walked around and labeled all sorts of plants with their Chinese characters.
Anlagen dann beschriftet haben mit ihren chinesischen Schriftzeichen.
We were not amazed. Perhaps we didn't quite believe that it can work the way they planned it.
Dass es so funktionieren kann, wie die das vorhaben.
Within only 12 months, 800 Chinese people had disassembled the Westfalen ironworks and taken them away with them. The biggest industrial transport in history. The plants were reassembled in Zhangjiagang, not far from Shanghai. The city above the sea, Shanghai is the boom city of Asia, the quintessence of modern China, fast, loud and colorful. Just like the country as a whole, Shanghai has gone through some turbulent changes. The driving force behind such enormous economic growth is industry and the building trade, and both, more than anything, need iron and steel. No other country on earth uses and produces more of it than China does. 200 kilometers upstream the Yangtze River, the docks of the steel company Shanghai. It is 2 o'clock in the morning. A 40,000-ton freighter arrives. It carries rust-colored soil from Australia, the material from which iron and steel are made, iron ore. The ore can be found almost all over the world. That is why it normally can be bought cheaply. But a worldwide fight for the best quality materials from Australia and Brazil has broken out. The prices have risen steeply because the demand in China continues to grow. 1/3 of the iron ore worldwide now goes to the Celestial Empire. Shovelfuls of dusty soil are loaded onto conveyor belts and are distributed across the huge storage grounds of the steel company. A few hours later. Like every morning, Mr. Sao walks the 300 meters from his flat to the main entrance of Shanghai. Sao is one of 10,000 people now employed by the huge steel company. And new people are being employed all the time. The first few weeks, the new arrivals have to march to work in lockstep. Discipline is greatly valued in China. At great speed, Shanghai developed from a small company to a powerful private steel producer. Thanks to the plants from Dortmund, it continues to grow with no end in sight. There are two ways of producing steel. Either iron ore is melted to make pig iron and then hardened to make steel. Or the steel is made from scrap metal. Mr. Sao supervises a furnace that produces steel from scrap iron. 40% of steel worldwide are produced that way. No other metal is recycled even nearly as much. Carefully, women crane operators load the metal scrap buckets before they are taken to the melting furnace. The right choice and distribution is very important for Sao and his people to be able to melt good steel. Mr. Sao is currently plagued by worries. Like all raw materials for steel production, scrap is in short supply. That is why Mr. Sao inspects the scrap storage every morning before briefing his people and checking the furnace. This scrap is of quite bad quality. It contains a lot of copper because it is scrap from old electrical equipment. The steel is very thin there. It is already an end product. It is hardly worth reusing it. On the one hand, resources are scarce, and on the other, prices are high. That is why we have to use this bad scrap anyway. The price for scrap has gone up by a huge amount, by 20 to 30 euros per ton in the last few months alone. There should really be much more scrap here. Mr. Sao needs supplies for the turn of the year, because there won't be any fresh supplies at that time for 2 weeks. The scrap is delivered by lorry, but mostly by ship. Most of the small scrap barges are family businesses. The ship is their home. They collect the scrap in the provinces and transport it to the steel company. During the Chinese New Year celebration, these small companies go on holiday. Captain Ju also delivers scrap with his ship. He has already delivered his cargo. Now he goes to one of the islands outside Shanghai in the Yangtze Delta to collect fresh goods. He has been working on barges for more than 30 years. He has personally experienced the ups and downs of Chinese politics. The economic reforms began in the 80s and 90s. The reforms have finally given us the opportunity to work independently. A colleague and I then bought the ship ourselves. We have turned from a collective to a proper private company. This time, Captain Ju gets very high-quality scrap. But still, the ship does not make him rich. Of the 1,000 euros that he can earn per month, he needs 1/2 for the ship. The rest he shares with his partner. That leaves just over 200 euros for himself. That is enough to feed his family. Today, small private businesses like that of the scrap captain contribute a great deal to the economic power of China. At that time, I thought, now we have a completely new political power. If I buy a ship now, I am responsible for myself. When I work a lot, I can earn more and my life gets better. That is how I imagined it. The economic changes of the past 2 decades were most profitable for the towns on China's east coast. Most of all for Shanghai. Thousands of multi-story buildings were built here in the past 10 years. Everything old is pulled down and rebuilt. There is no end in sight for the building boom. In many western Chinese provinces, the economic revival has yet to materialize. In China, the gap between rich and poor is getting bigger. Millions of people therefore move from the rural areas to the rich east. 5 kilometers from the tower blocks of the Shanghai Commercial Center. Fisherman Pei is at work. Drive over there. Mr. Pei is not after fish. He fishes for scrap. Every day his cousin takes him to the Huang Pool in his little wooden boat. There Mr. Pei casts his magnet. The fisherman and his cousin, together with their wives, arrived from the poorer province of Anhui, further inland, to make their fortune in the east. Nothing stuck. I arrived in Shanghai 7 years ago to fish for eels. But now there are almost no eels here anymore. That is why I stopped fishing and started collecting scrap. On a good day, I can catch 50 kilograms. On a bad day, it's only 5 kilograms. Pei can sell 1 kilogram of scrap for 2 yuan, about 20 cents. So he makes about 80 euros per month. Pei's magnet would be able to hoist up to 200 kilograms, but it is usually only small metal parts that are thrown into the river during ship repair works. We do it early in the morning, at lunchtime, and late at night, whenever the police is not working. When they work, we stop, because it is not really allowed. Pei and his cousin often fish late at night, when there is the least risk of getting caught. For their work to be worth it, they have to make quite a big catch this evening. "40 tons of scrap metal are charged into Mr. Sao's scrap furnace. More than Fisherman Pei can fish for in 2 years. Here, in the so-called electric arc furnace, new steel is made from scrap and additives. Supervisor Sao is proud of his furnace, which has been in operation for a long time, before the plans from Dortmund arrived. My furnace was the first one of its type in all of Asia, and the 6th of its kind worldwide. Some of the scrap is preheated here, which means that we can melt steel at great speed. The next load of scrap will be heated in a special shaft of Mr. Sao's furnace and put into the furnace bit by bit. This saves valuable time and energy. Now the scrap furnace begins its real work. The enormous and still glowing electrodes are lowered into the furnace and the arc is ignited. A continuous electrical discharge between the electrodes and the scrap produces heat of more than 3,000 degrees and an unbelievable noise. I started working here 14 years ago. When I heard this noise for the first time, I felt like running away.
有一种想逃跑的感觉。因为本身这个我们就是。
But now it's like that. When we don't hear the noise while we work, it is really strange. Without the noise, we don't feel comfortable anymore. For as long as the furnace is working properly, I really like hearing the noise. For people from outside, it is noise, but for us, it's a sign that everything is working well. The smelting process takes about 40 minutes. So that it is faster, and in order to save energy, Sao blows a supply of pure oxygen into the furnace through a lens that is mounted on the side. Through the arc's extreme heat and the pure oxygen, the scrap gradually becomes molten. The smelting process in the electric arc furnace uses an enormous amount of energy. This is a problem in China because energy capacities lag behind ever-growing demand. Finally, the first molten slag runs out at the side. It floats on top of the steel because it is lighter. The slag contains those substances that ended up in the furnace together with the scrap and that would contaminate the steel. Once the scrap has become liquid, the workers have to take a sample. An unpleasant job because the temperature next to the furnace is more than 100 degrees. The samples are immediately analyzed in the laboratory. Only once the mixture is right, the cover of the furnace will be opened. Then 100 tons of crude steel can be tapped. Despite his routine at the furnace, when Mr. Sao looks back on the rapid changes that have taken place in the steel company over the past few years, he can sometimes hardly believe it himself. I really must say that we in the steel company are developing unbelievably fast. But these constant changes also mean that we are under some significant pressure. We didn't have molten pig iron. Now we have the blast furnaces from Dortmund and the large foundry and all the other processes for producing steel. Suddenly we have all that. For us, that means that we have to continue to learn. Every day at 11:30 a.m. on the dot, they have a break from learning and working. Then it is lunchtime in the steel company and in the rest of China. For an hour and a half, they forget all about steel and iron, and Mr. Sao is looking forward to that. He who eats is a king, says a Chinese proverb. Eating is a favorite activity in the People's Republic and a matter of importance. People put up with a 7-day working week and low wages, but to cancel lunch would be simply unforgivable. The two blast furnaces from Dortmund do not process scrap. Here, iron ore is smelted into iron. Once a day, safety manager Liu has to climb on top of the two furnaces. They extend almost 100 meters into the sky. When the waste gases do not block it too much, this affords Liu an impressive view over the steel company and the Yangtze River. The company's premises cover an area of more than 14 square kilometers, and it is continuously being expanded. We are on top of the second furnace. It has been in operation for only 1 month. Every morning I have to check whether the equipment up here all works faultlessly. Because of the blast furnace gases, we always have to come up here in pairs. It can be very dangerous. The machine room has to be checked as well. The massive cable drums on which the conveyor cages are suspended are powered from here. They are used to transport the iron ore, which was delivered by ship to the top, and to pour it into the blast furnace. There, oxygen is extracted from it. This, above all, requires coke. Once the iron ore and the coke are in the furnace, it is almost impossible to influence what goes on inside. Then, the quality of the pig iron has essentially already been determined. At the foot of the blast furnace, final preparations for the tapping, when the hot pig iron pours out of the furnace. Slowly, the drill is driven in front of the tap hole. Almost all the workers here are young and inexperienced. None of them has ever worked with such a large blast furnace. As a result of the steel boom, experienced workers are rare. After a short while, the drill seized up. Safety manager Liu cannot help, but the workers know what to do now. They have to help the process along with the oxygen lands. Pure oxygen is blown into the tap hole to clear the way for the pig iron. A hard job for the workers. The heat next to the tap hole is enormous, and then there's the hail of sparks from the burning oxygen. But still, for protection, normal outdoor shoes, overalls, and a towel in front of your face have to be sufficient. A small opening has been made. Now the drill has to finish opening the tap hole. Finally, the 1,500-degree hot pig iron gushes into the tapping spout. Nothing much is left of the drill itself. The pig iron absorbs a lot of carbon in the blast furnace. It is brittle and difficult to process. That is why the pig iron is later hardened into steel in the next step. After the pig iron, the lighter slag pours from the tap hole. It is used for road building or for cement. Liu and his people have to constantly make sure that the spout does not get blocked and the red-hot stream does not burst its banks. Unblock the spout over there. Every time the same. Everything must go away. It's too much in that place. It's piling up more and more. Back with barge captain Ju. His ship is fully loaded by now. Together with other scrap transporters, he is just waiting for the lock to open so that he can set off. There is a lot of competition in his business. The return is low. Sometimes he thinks about whether this line of work is still worth doing. Of course, it is very difficult to drive such a ship at my age. If there was another option, I would like to do it, but it is my trade after all. I have been doing it for decades already. And I also believe that if politics continues the way it is now, then we here in China have a bright future ahead of us. The lock is open. Captain Ju sets off with his cargo of scrap. He has a day's journey upstream the Yangtze River ahead of him. This is one of the most fertile regions in China. Here, every spare square meter is used for intense agriculture. Only a fraction of China's area is suitable for the cultivation of grain and rice at all, too little for its 1.3 billion inhabitants. The People's Republic already has to import a lot of grain. but industrialization is flourishing, particularly along the banks of the Yangtze River. Today, an enormous number of industrial parks, power stations and docks gather along the last 300 kilometers to the mouth of the river near Shanghai. China is investing a lot to improve infrastructure. Soon, you will never be further than 20 kilometers away from a motorway. That way, more and more arable land disappears under reinforced concrete. Near Nanjing, a few hundred kilometers away from Shanghai. Early in the morning, the workers set off to drive their boats to the middle of the Yangtze River. They are building one of the monumental bridges across the river. Most of the world's big bridge projects are currently being planned in China. Mr. Tang is responsible for one of the two support columns. Today the weather is good, and so he wants to put up 2 more steel parts with his people. The support column will be 1.5 times as high as the Cologne Cathedral. This is the northern part of the Nanjing Bridge. It's the first time that we are building a bridge with steel columns in China. The design follows the shape of the Eiffel Tower. At the same time, it is also the Chinese character for human being. All steel structures here are bent. That makes it quite a difficult structure, and we only work with the latest technologies. First of all, project manager Tang checks the tool steel objects. The pre-assembled parts were delivered by ship the night before. Both of them are more than 10 meters high and weigh 150 tons. The parts can be lifted to the top column only by crane. Working with this crane involves quite a risk. The crane loads, sways and swings easily. That is one of the main problems of our work. We can only work when wind forces are low. Today, there is almost no wind at the top of the crane. It gives a good view of the Yangtze River. It is China's lifeline and one of the longest and busiest rivers in the world. For the Chinese, it symbolizes their country. After a 20-minute ascent through the inside of the column, project manager Tang arrives at the top. 20 workers have to install the new steel part on a few square meters. Lifting it is a slow process. It will take at least 1.5 hours until it is up here. On the ground below, the ties are being loosened. Slowly, the crane driver lifts the first part. He must be very careful. The heavy weight of the steel object means that the crane ropes can easily start swaying or get out of control. Back with scrap fisherman Pei in Shanghai. He has had enough for today. It was a miserable catch, like so often recently. Pei and his cousin are not officially registered in Shanghai and therefore have no social security at all. It is still almost impossible in China to become registered anywhere other than your hometown. But because there is a lot of unemployment in many provinces and the peasant's income is minimal, millions move to the richest cities nonetheless. There, they are tolerated as cheap laborers for economic growth. Boats are all over the river now. A few years ago, there were no ships here at all. There are a few ships that collect what we have fished out of the water. They take the scrap to the steel factories and sell it on. They are the middlemen.
然后再卖给大的贩。
Mr. Pei and his cousin want to know what their colleagues have managed to collect and stock by a middleman.
现在越来越少。
Unfortunately, there is less and less scrap around. All those who used to fish for eel are now coming here to fish for scrap. Soon, there will be no scrap at all in the water. A box full of rusty pieces of metal. That is the catch of the many scrap fishermen today. Pei and his cousin drive home. Some have given up already and returned home. They only come here when it's eel season. But there is less and less to catch. When there is no more scrap, then we just have to find work on dry land. Soon, there will be no more work on the water. Mr. Pei does not just have to feed himself and his wife. His 6-year-old son lives at home with his grandparents. He has just started school. The scrap fisherman has to pay for the school fees and meals. For the Chinese, a good education has top priority. Every year he tries to send a few €100 home. Often, it is half of what he earns. His cousin had a son just under a year ago. For as long as he is not at school yet, he can live with him on the ship. Then the child has to go back home. In Shanghai, the school fees would be much higher because their son is not officially registered. Too much for the scrap fishermen. Back at the Nanjing Bridge, the steel part has now almost arrived at the top of the column. The workers are getting more tense. Slowly, the 150 tons of steel are put into position. Half of the workers are standing inside and the other half outside at the edge. Stop for a minute. Stop it. Careful in there. A bit to the left. Everybody inside, be careful. A bit higher. Suddenly, one corner tilts to one side. Stop, stop, stop. Everything okay in there? Carry on. Lower still. Millimeter by millimeter, the steel part is lowered. The narrow upper and lower edges must fit each other perfectly. Even a tiny deviation can have devastating consequences for the statics of the entire bridge. It fits. Manager Tang and his people are relieved. Now the steel part will just need to be secured using hundreds of bolts and screws. Back at the steel company Shanghai, the massive metal ladles, which are used to transport liquid pig iron and hot steel, have to be kept at a consistent temperature. Mr. Shen has a long way to his place of work high above the ladles and the converters. Great heat and bad air are part of his job. Mr. Shen is a crane driver at the Shanghai Steel Company. Like almost everything here, also Shen's equipment came from Dortmund 2 years ago. That had certain advantages. When I started here, the conditions weren't very good. The de-dusting plants were bad. Today, even the cranes have air conditioning. The employees' working conditions have improved quite a lot. Here at the steelworks, the pig iron arrives from the blast furnace. It is still liquid. The crane driver transports the full ladles to large steel containers, the converters. There, the pig iron is converted into steel. Now we have the pig iron on the hook and are on our way to the second converter. While working, one always has to watch the colleagues on the ground to make sure there are no accidents. The converter moves while I charge the pig iron, and I have to direct the ladle with this movement so that nothing gets spilled. That is the most important thing in my work. Mr. Shen has been there for 20 years, and he is famous for his steady hand. So far, he has never spilled anything. Slowly, he pours the liquid pig iron into the massive steel container. The converter can process more than 200 tons in one go. While the converter is being put upright again, crane driver Shen drives back and fetches the next ladle of pig iron. Several converters operate in parallel. That is the only way to process the huge amounts of pig iron from the blast furnaces. The gates close in front of the filled converter. Now the so-called refining processes begin. Oxygen is blown into the converter at great pressure in order to burn out excess carbon and other unwanted substances. Finally, pig iron turns into steel. After 8 hours in the crane, Mr. Shen packs in. And that is just as well, because like most workers at Shagang, he works 7 days a week. The factory develops, the more we earn. Our standard of living is getting better and better. The flats used to be quite bad. I have now been working in this factory for 20 years, and meanwhile we have built our own houses. 20 years ago, there was only farmland around here and small houses made of wood and loam. Today, the houses are made from reinforced concrete and stone, and they have to be large. Like almost everybody here, crane driver Shen comes from a peasant family. His 70-year-old mother-in-law is still out on the field every day. You can go home. You don't need to work here anymore. These are simply tiles, and these are steel windows. The steel for these window frames and the steel for the building is from Shagang. That is our steel. We bought these windows ourselves. We have had them made in a workshop. It took us about 2 months to build this house. Although some rooms are still empty, Shen is proud of his 250 square meters. The liquid steel from crane driver Shen's converter must quickly be poured into the casting machine. Workers add casting powder in order to improve the metal's surface. Inside the plant, the steel is shaped and at the same time significantly cooled down. At the bottom, the shaped and still red-hot steel comes out as an infinite strand. It is then cut into so-called steel slabs. The slabs, which weigh tons, are currently in great demand worldwide. Shagang's customers are all after these specimens. Slabs are rolled into plates and steel sheet, which will eventually turn into cars and tins, ships and fridges. The steel from Mr. Sao's furnace also needs to be cast, but here everything is a size smaller. Mr. Sao likes watching the red-hot metal while it cools down. The cooling water is very important for the quality of the steel. I like this place very much. It is like a free sauna for me. I watch it every day. Mr. Sao's casting plant does not produce slabs, it produces so-called billets, beams made from steel. 6 red-hot strands emerge from the plant simultaneously. They are also cut into individual parts. Then they are transported to the steel mill next door. The steel beams are heated up once again in order to make them more malleable. Then the steel is put through several rollers that exert enormous pressure on the metal. Gradually, the thick beam turns into thin wire. The narrower the steel beam, the quicker the process. In the end, it races through the rolling plants at 160 kilometers per hour. The beam has turned into 9 kilometers of long wire. There are many uses for the wire from Shagang. It is used for reinforced concrete or woven into cables for bridges and cranes. Every so often, Mr. Sao pops into the wire store to see what happens to all the scrap that ends up in his furnace. He finds it difficult to imagine that China will need less steel one day. Sao is optimistic about the future of his country. Of course, I can't say exactly how the Chinese economy stands worldwide. I can't judge that. I am not sure about that. But I would say that in 20 years we will double our economic output. That is the minimum. The highest television tower in Asia, the most modern airport in China, the Trans-Rapid. All that was created within the last 10 years in Shanghai alone. Much of it was built with steel from Shagang. For the 2010 World Fair, an entire district will be pulled down and built from scratch. An enormous deep-sea harbor is also being built. The People's Republic is now the 3rd largest trading nation in the world. China wants to become the economic power of the 21st century. The speed at which things change and the general optimism in China are impressive. Nobody quite knows, however, whether the country will manage the leap from the 19th into the 21st century within only a few decades. After a long day, Mr. Sao is happy to be at home at last. As usual, he walks the few hundred meters from his work to his home. Mr. Sao has done his work for the day, but at the steelworks and in the rest of the country, the work goes on. Gernot Bar has come to terms with the fact that the steel is now being produced in Zhangjiagang and no longer in Dortmund. So I try to hand over the plant to the Chinese as best as possible. I should think it won't have been the last steelwork and the last furnace to close down somewhere. It goes on like that. Who knows which way? That's how it is. That is how it must have been. Many hundreds of years ago, the men discovered a rich vein in the rock. The vein had to be mined, but the silver that the miners had been after was suddenly not silver anymore. Rumor had it that goblins had transformed it into something else to stop people's greed. No one else was to rule the underground kingdom of the earth spirits. Fearlessly, the miners from the Ore Mountains in Saxony advanced deeper and deeper into the interior of the earth. But instead of silver, they kept coming across this unknown substance, which they believed was bewitched and worthless. They named it after the ominous goblins, nickel. New Caledonia is situated in the huge expanse of the Pacific Ocean, on the other side of the equator, around 1,500 kilometers east of Australia. The archipelago is surrounded by a massive coral reef. Across many kilometers, rocky terraces lean against the mountains. They are evidence of surface mining, which reaches the treasure from above. Nowhere else can you find so much nickel in such a limited space. Around 1/4 of the world's nickel deposits are in New Caledonia. The French overseas territory lives off mining nickel and has been for several hundred years. If it is up to the big mining firms, the valuable raw material will continue to be mined for a long time. Eric Attai works for the Société Minière du Sud Pacifique, the SMSP. It is a local company. Eric Attai is a Kanak, as the native inhabitants of New Caledonia call themselves. Kanak means nothing other than human being. Until very recently, Kanaks only held menial jobs, but this is no longer the case. I'm only 40, and I have noticed that never before has a native been responsible for mining. Never before has a Kanak held the position that I am holding now, being the boss of the mine.
Quitter à ce poste que j'ai aujourd'hui, c'est-à-dire chef de mine.
The product that we make is very important for us. It means jobs for the Canucks and also the people around the mine.
Pour moi, c'est quelque chose de primordial dans le sens où ça donne de l'emploi. L'emploi aux Kanaks et puis les gens de l'environnement.
Eric Attai comes from very near the Wako mine. That is why he speaks Kumen, the local language, one of 27 New Caledonian languages. In order to get along well with his colleagues, it is essential that he is able to communicate in their language. It is often more important than being able to answer technical questions. It is one of Eric Attai's responsibilities to always be in the right place at the right time. He organizes, controls, and directs. He has a hand in making sure that the raw material, nickel, which the world relies upon, can be constantly supplied. Eric Attai has been part of it for 20 years, half of his life. There's hardly anything in the mine that he has not done before. If one of his team drops out, he slips into one of his former roles, be it as a machinist at the rock machine or driving the shovel excavator. As far as this is possible, Eric Attai proceeds carefully to get to the nickel. He follows the instructions of the geologists. But not all stone is the same. He has come across some ore. It contains enough of the green gold, as they used to call nickel in New Caledonia. It is worth processing. Thierry Crasté is a mining engineer in Nepouy, around 100 kilometers south of Waco. The 38-year-old man from southern France has seen a lot of the world. In Africa, he mostly dug for gold. In New Caledonia, he's looking for nickel. The mine of Nepouy is situated on the Copeto Massif. It is one of 4 mines run by the French State Mining Society, SLN, the Société Le Nickel. The SLN has been in New Caledonia since the end of the 19th century. Before Thierry Crasté drives to the mine, he asks his boss whether the long-awaited cargo ship has arrived yet. It is supposed to pick up the nickel. Hello, Thierry. How are you doing? Oh, thank you. Did you see that the ship will arrive at 3:30 in the afternoon? No, I thought it would arrive this morning, no? Yes, but it is late. It was supposed to come this morning, but it was rescheduled. Okay, no problem. In New Caledonia, nickel ore can be found under a very thin layer of earth. The nickel-containing layers are 30 to 40 meters thick and sometimes up to 100 meters. Today, the engineers are taking an interest in this red and yellow laterite soil with nickel. Thierry Crasté wants to know how the test drills are going. With the help of a machine, the miners are obtaining rock samples from deep below the Earth's surface. In order to locate the nickel, the drill team has to make the circle smaller and smaller and drill every few meters. The mining engineers need a precise picture of the underground layers of nickel. What we can get here is exactly what we see there, only what sticks to the edge there. Everything you can see, but we avoid going right to the edge. And on the other side? It seems that the plane with the fissure over there at the back blocks up. I thought that there are more minerals there. And the problem is, if we want to do something over there, we would first of all have to remove the unproductive layers. I don't know whether we can manage that. The test drills will decide over the future of the mine. Nobody knows whether or how much nickel is buried there. Until recently, geologists thought that one part of the mine could be closed down. Then they turned out to be wrong. They came across a layer that contains 10 years' worth of nickel. Thierry Crasté and his colleagues are eagerly waiting to see what the hollow rod will bring to light. The miners immediately see that the rock is not as promising as they had thought. Only when the rock is weathered is there a chance of nickel deposits.
Combien? 11 mètres?
Thierry Crastet wants to know more details about the drill.
T'es à combien là?
How deep are you? 11 meters?
Ouais.
Before this test drill, the experts carried out some geological calculations. According to those, there should be nickel here. What you see here is not what we expected. The most important thing for mineralization to take place is the weathering of the rock. What we look for is material that has deteriorated, and here we see healthy material that has not undergone many changes. That means that we have less of a chance to find mineable nickel. For us, this type of material is sterile, simply unusable. It is of no significance to us. What we look for is areas where there have been changes, areas with a layer of loam where you can find nickel.
Parties altérées avec des zones argileuses dans lesquelles se retrouve le nickel.
In those places where the miners did discover something, the nickel is mined in shifts. Around 850,000 tons of nickel ore per year. This makes the Nepui mine one of the largest in New Caledonia. It is 5 kilometers long. Its highest plateaus are 1,000 meters above sea level. The miners use heavy equipment to get at the nickel. In order to mine 1 ton of nickel ore, they have to move several times that amount from one place to another. The shovel dozers, bulldozers and trucks carry off between 4 and 7 times that amount from the mountains. The pure nickel content of the rock is around 2.9% in Nepui. Compared with other mines, that is a lot. Like in every other industry, the mining industry can no longer get by without computers. The 100-ton trucks are equipped with satellite navigation systems. That way the engineers always know what, how much and where to the material is transported. Any remaining uncertainties can be settled via radio. Miners are sought after in New Caledonia. It has not always been that way. Mines had to be closed down 20 years ago. Today the demand for nickel is larger than ever. This is one of the reasons why the workers earn a relatively good wage. A lorry driver earns around 190,000 francs Pacifique per month. That's 1,600 euros, as much as a teacher. Back to the Wakao mine on the New Caledonian west coast. Occasionally, Eric Attai himself lends a hand to roll the rocks along. The locals are proud of their mine. When mining began at the end of the 19th century, New Caledonia was a French colony. It was therefore mostly French entrepreneurs who exploited the land. To this day, it is predominantly international corporate groups who make a lot of money out of the mineral resources. The local mining company which Eric Attai works for reinvests their profits in the region, in fish farms, hotels and restaurants. That way jobs are created outside the mines. In order to separate the nickel ore from the worthless rock, the stones are first of all pre-sorted. Regular analysis ensure that the valuable nickel does not get lost. I am taking a sample. This is not really my job. But I do it because we don't have enough people. We have asked for 2 people for this job. And the 2 men will begin tomorrow.
2 personnes pour faire ce travail. Et les 2 gars, ils vont commencer demain.
The miners put the biggest lumps, which don't fall through the grid on the ramp, into closed-down parts of the mine, or they are used for road building. Sometimes the boulders are so massive that they are not suitable for that. All other rocks end up in the concasseur. With a deafening noise, the rock eater immediately begins to do its job. The rock is shaken and jounced, shattered and crushed. The machine separates the different sizes. Large rocks that are of no interest for mining nickel slide down into the depth. Smaller rocks and nickel-containing earth falls onto a conveyor belt that spits it out onto a heap. A simple but effective technique. After the disappointing test drill, Thierry Crastet and his colleagues discuss what should be done next. Where should the next blasting take place? Where can they mine, and what should they do with the huge amount of worthless rock that accumulates? The solution for perhaps closing these areas is to start there again, to realize the first third that way. Until then, there is no risk of environmental pollution. We do it as always. Yes, even until here, there's little risk. The engineers try to exploit the mineral resources as best as possible. Often they cannot make allowances for the environmental impact this has. The weathered nickel-containing laterite soil is thoroughly rinsed like in a large washing machine drum with several pre-wash stages. The aim is to prepare the nickel ore in such a way that only very specific parts make the next stage of the journey, namely across a 7-kilometer-long pipeline to another washing plant at the foot of the mine. Everything larger than 3 centimeters will be separated out beforehand and falls by the wayside. Extracting nickel is a very laborious process. When Thierry Crastet used to prospect for gold, he achieved his goal earlier, and yet nickel holds a fascination for him. There are many reasons that make people want to mine nickel. It is a little bit like the gold fever in the history of North America. That is why we chase it day after day and try to mine as much nickel as possible. There is that factor. It's a little bit like it is with gold. After all, they call nickel green gold, especially in New Caledonia. It is a little bit like when people bet on horses. They bet on a certain horse, and once they are into it, they can't get away from it. And it's a little bit like that here. It is satisfying to be able to say, see, I have understood you, I saw you, I found you, I've got you.
Je t'avais compris, je t'ai vu, je t'ai trouvé, je t'avais compris et je t'ai eu, quoi.
Quite often, deep clouds hang low over the mine of Nepui. That is when the temperatures at an altitude of 1,000 meters can fall to almost freezing point. If the clouds get even heavier, and if you can see for less than 50 meters, then the lorry drivers have to stop working. The mine comes to a rest for a little while. Nickel mining in New Caledonia has a 100-year-old history. It was not only political prisoners and convicts from France who came to the prisoner island, but also adventurers from Europe, Asia, and America to make their fortune in the mines. Jean-Franck Natimen, an immigrant with French and Indonesian parentage, worked as a miner in Tibagi in the north of the island for many years. Together with his fellow miners, he is trying to keep alive the memory of life in the mine. When I got here in 1948, there weren't so many activities here. There was only the mine. The atmosphere was good. That's what the atmosphere was like at that time everywhere.
aujourd'hui parce
It
qu'aujourd'hui
wasn't at all like it is today, because people today don't have the same sensitivities. People think differently. We used to be all brothers and sisters. I knew 7 fellow miners who died down in the mine because of earth slides, explosions, or because they fell into a pit, or because the lift shaft cable tore.
Ou tomber dans un puits, ou alors par le puits, par la cage, le câble cassé.
In some regions, there's hardly a mountain that remains untouched by the engineers in their search for new deposits. Although today there are environmental obligations and none of the mining companies fail to point out the special environmental measures in their business reports, it remains to be seen how successful it will be to plant bushes and trees where nickel is no longer being mined.
Pour la création de ces versas stériles,
In order to fill up these areas with worthless rock, we use up natural areas. In this case, we use up very large areas to deposit useless stones, and we have destroyed some virgin forest. Our main objective when we build a hill is to ensure stability, to make sure that the whole thing is stable. That is, that all the rubble that we deposit in this place doesn't later end up in the valley.
plus bas dans la vallée. Donc ça, c'est l'objectif majeur. Si on veut continuer à pouvoir développer notre activité,
That is the most important objective. If we want to further develop our activities in New Caledonia, we must be able to show that we can do a neat job. To leave a place without there being consequences for the locals for years or even centuries to come. The environmental protection expenses are necessary to secure our activities for the
elle est
future.
nécessaire pour garantir notre activité de demain.
On the way to one of the many diving grounds around New Caledonia, only a few hundred meters offshore, Jackie Mermout and Rick Annex have been fighting for years against the consequences of mining nickel for the coral reef and people's health. They are lobbying for UNESCO to declare the second biggest reef system in the world after the Great Barrier Reef in Australia a World Heritage Site. Rick Annex, who is American by birth, has been living in New Caledonia for 20 years. He believes that that is the only way to put a stop to the unchecked expansion of the nickel industry, at least to some degree.
In the past, the main consequences of nickel mining on the marine environment have been through runoff. And this runoff has also been aided by massive deforestation. And fires. There are other more insidious and pernicious aspects of nickel mining, such as the toxic heavy metals that run off as well. And there are many things we don't know yet, which I'm sure will be discovered if we investigate.
As part of the groundwork for this research, Rick Annex looks at the state of the coral reef to register any changes. An underwater desert. The leachades from the mine cover the corals and take away the sunlight. As a consequence, they fade and die. Only a few meters further on, it looks like this. There is no pollution. Due to its secluded location, over millions of years, New Caledonia was able to develop a unique fauna and flora. Many species have not even been researched yet. Change of shift in the mine in Waku. Eric Attai makes sure that his colleagues park their machines according to the rules. Every driver in the mine has to carefully record how many tons of rock he has transported. That is the only way of monitoring the overall amount that is being mined every day. Eric Attai delivers the data. The engineers and geologists rely on them. Until not too long ago, the native population did not know about shift changes, regular working hours and finishing times. Previously, only few Kanaks worked in the mines. They did not have the necessary expertise. Most miners came from abroad. Since about 15 years ago, the mine has belonged to the northern province. For many Kanaks, this marked a significant change in their lives. The profit is now theirs, not other people's. The families used to be poor. Today, the mines secure a certain degree of prosperity. Today, I see people who get involved. People from my race who want to work. They want to make it. They want to achieve something one day. It motivates me to see that we have mineral resources. It is like a dream. We didn't believe it. But today there is the mine.
C'était un rêve. On ne croyait pas, mais aujourd'hui, la mine, elle existe. Et c'est pour nous, en tant que Mélanésiens, Kanaks, gens du pays, ici dans la province nord, c'est quelque chose de... C'est plus que toute autre chose.
The Kanaks have a special relationship with nature. People always stay connected to the land of their ancestors. The ground provided food for their forebears. It is thanks to them that they are here. Eric Attai's family relies on the harvest. It is too expensive to buy the vegetables. In August, tapioca is in season. In New Caledonia, like elsewhere in the tropics, this starchy tuber is one of the staple foods. Clara, Eric Attai's wife, is not part of his tribe. She comes from one of the neighboring islands. She and Eric speak to each other in French. Clara does not understand Gourmet. We collect the tapioca. Yes. First, take the ones that are peeled, and then the others. 5 hours drive and 300 kilometers further south. The environmentalists are on their way to Goro. One of the largest nickel mining areas is to be developed near the little village. Jackie Mermout and Rick Annex have been to Goro many times before. They are fighting against this large project. They have many meetings with Valentin Agourer, one of the village elders.
Bonjour, Jackie.
Hello, Jackie. Can we talk to you for 5 minutes? Yes. That's very nice of you. Let's go to the meeting house. The environmentalists know that they are no longer able to stop the Canadian Global Corporation INCO, but they at least try to inform and to make demands. Many relationships to many foreign organizations and foundations of people who come here are dangerous for the country. 2 years ago, they came here and tried to force a number of things, but they did not manage to do it. Now they want to come back, 2 years later, with different working methods. So we must try to make sure, given that they do exploit our mineral resources, that they do it with our consent, and that they not just simply get rich and leave us with the dirt, pollution, destruction, death. We must not allow that. It is true, people came here to enlighten us about things. We ourselves, we do not know what that is. There are no graduates amongst us. We don't have any people that are intelligent enough to decide this. We were at the mercy of Inco. They promise us the mine must work. They will help the people with little projects. They will help. They will give money. But today, the people ask themselves, is that good neighborliness? The people are starting to ask themselves questions. It is pure poison, and it will spread out in the sea up to the mussels and fishes that we fish directly in front of us, a few miles away. The Canadian corporate group Inco will use chemicals to remove the nickel from the rock. The French company SLN prefers water and a lot of energy. Of the 2,300 tons of rock that pass the washing plant daily, on average, 53 tons of nickel remain. Step by step, the concentration of nickel gets higher during washing and filtering. Female workers are preparing rock samples that are taken regularly at the various stages of production. Only a precise examination reveals something about the nickel content. Based on these analyses, the experts decide where it is worth continuing to mine. Because of mining, the nickel-containing soil is washed all the way to the coast. Large parts of the mangrove woods have already suffocated in the mud. Eric Attai is not put off by that. He continues to search for a very special treat.
Le nickel.
When people talk about pollution, then it is true that nickel pollutes our water and all our mangroves, but not all of them.
Tous nos mangroves sont pas tout, mais les endroits où il y a
There
des
is
embouchures de
pollution
mines,
only where the openings of the mines are.
ils sont salis du fait par rapport aux ouvertures de mines, mais les poissons,
But
les
fishes
crabes,
and crabs are not
ils sont
poisoned.
pas contaminés.
You
On peut
can
les
eat
manger
them
comme
as if there wasn't a mine.
c'est comme si la mine n'existe pas. Ce sont
The
bons.
crabs are good.
Les crabes
We
sont
often come to this place to
Et
look
c'est
for
toujours, c'est
crabs
souvent,
for
on
our
vient
dinner.
dans cet endroit, fouiller, chercher quelques crabes pour nous, pour le soir, quoi.
With a lot of skill and a little bit of luck, Eric Attai makes an excellent catch. Today he has managed to catch 3 large specimens, enough for an ample meal. It is not certain, however, for how long he will continue to find crabs here. Lorries transport nickel ore and highly concentrated nickel soil from the mines to the landing stages by the sea. The local mining company that Eric Attai works for is not able to process the mined nickel ore in New Caledonia. It does not own a melting furnace. That is why it is initially loaded onto barges. The small barges drag the cargo to the open sea. There, large cargo ships wait for them that cannot go over the reef to the harbor because the water level is too low. The cargo ships take the nickel ore to Australia, Japan, and even to the Ukraine, where it is being melted. The French Société Le Nickel has owned a nickel melting furnace in the capital Nouméa for almost 100 years. It is in operation 24 hours a day. Nickel ore and nickel-containing soil arrives there from the 5 mines in various concentrations. To feed the furnaces, the various ores are dried, mixed and warmed up. Only then it is possible to ensure nickel production of a consistently high quality. Electrical furnaces use high voltage and huge amounts of energy to heat the ores up to 1,600 degrees. Once per hour, the men tap the furnace. Then a white stream of melted and glowing minerals flows. In a first step, substances that would contaminate the precious metal are partially separated from the nickel. The lightest slag separates from the metal. The workers extract 110 kilograms of iron nickel from 1 ton of ore. The iron nickel is not yet sufficiently clean to be sold. There are different procedures depending on whether desired end product is iron nickel or pure nickel. The main thing is, however, to get rid of contaminants which are still present after the initial boil. Apart from small amounts of silicon, sulfur, chromium and carbon, the metal now consists of between 25 and 30% nickel. The compound is now treated with a desulfurization agent. This will lower the high temperatures. Once cooled down, a nickel resin is precipitated at the end. The individual pieces are only about 2 or 3 centimeters big and contain 1/3 to 1/4 nickel. That is all there is left in the end. The crabs are well rinsed with water. Eric Attai returned to his son and his wife with his catch. What is a feast for others is an everyday occurrence for Eric Attai's family. They eat crabs 2 or 3 times a week. The crabs are good. Yes, later we will eat with Mom and Dad. Will you eat with Mom? Is that okay? At weekends or on special occasions, Clara cooks crabs in banana leaves. She serves them with sweet potatoes, yam, bananas, and a coconut sauce. Because for Eric the night will be over at 4 in the morning when he has to leave to start his shift in the mine, today the simple version is served, crabs on their own. Containers with tons of nickel resin leave New Caledonia. It is shipped all over the world, to America, Asia, and to Europe. Some of the nickel resin also ended up in Bochum, in a ThyssenKrupp melting plant. It is added to the scrap metal that fills the hall by the train and truckload. The people are tiny in comparison, but nonetheless they control the processes. Every half hour the electric arc furnace is filled with material in the 80-ton cages. This is a place where elemental forces meet. A glance into the fire of the earth, insights into processes that normally only take place deep below us. The workers monitor the transformation. With the help of oxygen, nitrogen, and other inert gases, the nickel fuses with the scrap. The shapeless mass is turned into an endless string. The slab, as it is called by steelworkers, is given the finishing touch. Heated, compressed, and rolled. Protected against rust and the ravages of time. Stainless steel. Wafer thin and supple, ready to be shaped into washing machines, cutlery, sinks, parts of cars, to adorn civilization.